This is widely considered the greatest house ever built in America. It's also spent the better part of a century slowly sinking into the waterfall that made it famous, as the tale of popularity seems to go. This is Fallingwater, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. As a work of theoretical architecture, it's an absolute miracle. As an actual house for actual humans, it's a bit of a mess. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly why. One story at a time, because every single one of these stories has something to teach you about your own home. First thing first, hi, I'm Dan, an award-winning architect, and surprise, surprise, I plan and review homes for a living. The fastest way to train that architectural eye is to study the famous houses that got it wrong in interesting ways, because the American Institute of Architects didn't just call Fallingwater a good home, they voted it the building of the 20th century. So the story everyone leaves out about Fallingwaters is that Frank Lloyd Wright didn't do a single drawing for 9 months. He took the deposit, took the commission essentially, and then ghosted. He was 67, hadn't landed a major job in years, and most of the architecture world had already written him off as washed up. Then one morning, the client phones to say he's driving up from Pittsburgh to see the plans that don't exist. Wright hangs up, walks to his drafting table, and draws the entire house, like every floor, every section, every elevation, in roughly 2 hours. This dramatically reminds me of every single project I ever did in university. Anyway, by the time the client arrived, the building was on paper. That 2-hour sketch became the comeback of the century. Time magazine even put it on the cover in January 1938, and a private rich family's house became overnight the building that literally defined modern American architecture. Also, the brief, by the way, was simple. The Kaufman had picnicked by this specific waterfall for 15 years. They wanted a house facing it. Wright did not give them a house facing it, he gave them a house on top of it, where they could never actually see the falls from inside. And this is true. You can literally not see any part of the waterfall from inside any room. Casually, he ignored the only thing that they asked for. So to understand why he got away with that, you have to understand rocks. So have a look at the land. The water here drops 30 feet, and it does that because the ground is built in layers, hard bands of sandstone with kind of like soft rocks in between them. The water ate away the soft stuff and left the hard ledges kind of sticking out, stacked and horizontal, all jutting over the drop. It's important that you hold that picture in your mind. Wright called his philosophy organic architecture, which was later formulated to become critical regionalism. The principle is that a building should not sit on the land, it should grow out of it, as if the site produced it. So of the hill, not on the hill. So he built a house that is the rock ledges, a stack of man-made stone and concrete shelves, kind of cantilevered over that exact drop. As he put it to the family, I want you to live with the waterfall, not just look at it. It's kind of like saying you shouldn't read a book to understand it. You should dress the part and physically act it out. Do with that as you wish. A house that ignores its site always feels like it was just dropped there. That's traditional modernism, a universal architecture that could essentially exist anywhere. This being organic or regional modernism means it has modern elements, sure, but can only exist in its specific environment. So our first valuable takeaway is the obvious move is almost never the great move. For example, the obvious house faces the view, the great house becomes part of it. A little fun fact on the influence a great house has is in 1959, Alfred Hitchcock needed a house for the bad guy in North by Northwest. Sleek, modern, digging into a cliff, cantilevered into thin air. His set designer lifted it almost directly from Fallingwater's plans, and it essentially set a template that really never went away. Like, watch any film. The villain lives in a cold glass and concrete box hanging off a hillside. The hero, who is more loved and who is more wholesome and needs to represent all things good, lives in a cozy little cottage with a porch. Tony Stark's house, Ex Machina's research compound, every Bond lair, all Fallingwater's doing. The most beloved home in America spent its second life as the visual shorthand for this man is about to off someone. Okay, before we go in, let me show you how an architect is taught to read this house, or really any house, because once you see it, you'll start reading your own home in the same way. Okay, forget the rooms for a second, strip the whole thing back to its diagram, the single idea underneath everything. Fallingwater is essentially two things in tension: heavy stone that anchors and light floors that float. Look at the plan and you'll see thick, solid walls of stone drawn almost black, or they are black, all clustered in the center. This is all the heavy stuff. That stone is the anchor. The chimney, the structure, essentially the spine the whole house hangs off of. And everything else, the parts you actually live in, is thin lines and glass. Light floors that cantilever off that core. So there are really, again, two kinds of spaces here. This is the concept worth stealing: served and servant space. The heavy stone core swallows all the serving stuff shown in yellow. The structure, the stairs, the chimney, even the little kitchen tucked behind it. That frees the served spaces, which are the living areas, to be open, glassy, and like weightless. The solid always serves the open. But all that hanging it's great, only if you allow for enough hold for it. The contractor, who happened to also be a trained engineer, found about half of what he was sure it needed and warned them that the terraces would essentially sag. Frank and I are the same when it comes to constructive criticism, it seems, because he said he had given more to this house than any client deserved, and that if they did not trust him, then to hell with the whole thing. Like, classic example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So he nearly walked off the most famous house in America because a builder did some basic maths. Moving along, the client begged and apologized, and they continued. Incredible. The builder, of course, was right. The day they removed the wooden props holding it up during construction, the terraces cracked immediately on the spot. That's so embarrassing. And they kept drooping until engineers finally declared the house like critically close to collapse. The rescue in 2002 meant lifting the living room floor, numbering 557 stones one by one, threading hidden steel cables underneath and tensioning them like a suspension bridge to hold the whole thing up. This was the $7 million fix to a problem one man flagged for free. We love that for everyone. Anyway, now that we are all money conscious, back to the plan, which has 4 levels. A functional basement, which means foundation base, wine cellar, water closet, and a pool. Going up, we have the rest of the main floors. The front door at Fallingwater is barely an actual door. The way in is super low and dark and tight. The ceilings drop to about 6'4". Wright was 5'8", and he sized the ceilings to himself, his own dimensions, which is a perfectly normal thing to do to other people's home. But the squeeze is super intentional. It's called compression and release. You deliberately pinch a space, low, dark, narrow, so the second it opens, the next room feels enormous. You are physically manipulating the body to feel some kind of relief. You do not need higher ceilings everywhere. You just need contrast. So, stepping through to the living room, I mentioned earlier how everything is pinned around this stone hearth. Frank built the entire house around the fireplace because to him, the hearth, and to many people, the hearth was the heart, the place a family gathers, essentially. And this here is a bunch of rocks. And those rocks, respectfully known as boulders, are exactly where they have always been. The house was built directly onto this bedrock, and that is the original rock. Now, what's so funny about this whole thing is Frank is famously known for these boulders. The whole philosophy of living within nature and not on it was actually the client's idea. Wright wanted to cut these boulders flush with the floor. The family stopped him because that rock was the very specific spot they had always sunbathed by the stream, which again is such rich behavior. So the single most poetic, organic gesture in the entire house was really just the result of a losing argument. Now for the invisible corners, first of their kind, there is no post, no frame. The glass simply meets glass and turns the corner. And when those windows swing open, the corner of the building vanishes completely. Wright called this very dramatically the destruction of the box. Think about it for thousands of years. The corner is where the building is held up. So the corner is solid, right? Heavy and closed. But Wright's cantilevered floors meant that he no longer needed any support at the corners. And people really ate this up. They ate this whole room up. Albert Einstein, President Roosevelt, decades later, Angelina Jolie booked the whole place out as a surprise gift for Brad Pitt because apparently he's not like other girls and he's a big architecture nerd. So, also in this room, there is a hidden hatch built into the living room floor that opens up into a private waterfall. A staircase from your sofa to the water, or just an extremely convenient toilet. This is actually really a gorgeous way of naturally cooling your house down to. No machines, it's called cross ventilation, just two windows on opposite sides of a space to create essentially an in and out. In addition to that, if you could get a huge naturally flowing waterfall below your house, that would help. Now, walking to the corner of the living room behind the great stone chimney, you find the kitchen. And it's super tiny, cramped, plain, like tucked away, literally like a cupboard, with steel cabinets and a Cherokee red floor. In 1937, a kitchen was back of house, a place to hide the work, not show it off. And that single fact tells you how completely our homes have changed. Because today the kitchen is the heart of the house, the room we spend a lot of time together and gather. If you're renovating an older home, this is often the biggest move available to you, pulling the kitchen out of the back and into the center of how you actually live. Heading up, and notice the stairs are narrow again, dark and tight. By the time you arrive in a bedroom, it feels like a relief. Watch the wall of glass running vertically up alongside the stair, a light screen that slots through all these floors and quietly tells you where you are in the house and your surroundings. Wright is really planning the whole journey, like squeeze and release, dark and light, the entire way up. This level is very backroom core, with its secret terraces and rooms indicated with green arrows, like this dressing room, and has its own terrace, bigger than the main bedroom. And here's where the plan gets like super honest about its priorities. The bedrooms are tiny, genuinely cramped. The main bedroom is so tight that the museum had to remove one of the beds just to fit tour groups through. The justification for this is every bedroom opens up onto its own enormous private terrace, often bigger than the room itself. Again, that's not an accident. It's like a value system built into the plan. Wright shrank the private rooms on purpose because he didn't want you holed up in like a bedroom. He wanted you outside in the trees or downstairs with a family by the fire. The bedroom is just for sleeping, so the bedroom can be small. The walls and floors in the bathrooms aren't tile, typically. They're cork. Warm underfoot, soft and silent, which in a house sitting on a roaring waterfall kind of matters more than I think you might think. The toilets sit low to the ground, a Japanese idea Wright had picked up and believed was healthier. And the showers have huge industrial heads, which is so interesting because deliberately it represents the water falling from the waterfall, as if you are again inside of the waterfall. Up to the top floor is the study. Wright cut a clean semicircle out of wood purely so that the corner of the window behind it can swing open without clipping it. He designed the furniture to a millimeter in every square inch of this house, and then he also bolted most of it down. So across the whole house, roughly half the furniture is built in and fixed, specifically so that the family couldn't rearrange it or bring in anything Wright hadn't chosen. Depending on whose house it is, that move can be seen as either super creative or a little bit narcissistic. Anyway, the lesson is, minus the ego, furniture designed for the actual room, built into the actual walls, will always feel a little more right than something you brought to just like fill the gap. It's super intentional. So back outside, The color palette is pretty interesting. 2 colors in the entire house, like internally and externally. Soft ochre concrete and the cherry oaky red on every piece of steel specifically. That's it. The sandstone was quarried on site and laid rough, like sticking out past the mortar so that the walls read like the stream's natural ledges that we spoke about earlier. What's interesting about red is why the modernists loved red. And what's more interesting is my theory on Wright's interpretation of red. So it came out of the avant-garde art they were all soaked in. The whole movement grew alongside de stijl, which means the style, and the Bauhaus, where the gospel was primary colors, like plus maybe some black and white. Think Mondrian, red, blue, yellow on a white grid. The Bauhaus even ran color theory as a core subject. So modernist architects inherited red, blue, and yellow as the correct, rational, non-decorative colors to put on architecture. The ones you could justify as objective rather than like any kind of specific fussy taste. Red, I think, was just simply the raunchiest and like most proud of them all. Red essentially explains the building, and this is the architect's favorite reasoning. You can color code a structure to teach people how it actually works. Paint the steel beams or the columns red so the eye instantly reads what's holding up the building versus what's just like infill. The Center Pompidou is a great version of this. Structure and services painted in bright colors so you can read the whole machine. Red turns a structure into a diagram you can actually see. Wright had a deep, lifelong romance with indigenous American culture and the idea of an authentically American of-the-place architecture, free of any European copying. Cherokee red tied his signature color to the land's original people and to that earthy, rooted, like native quality he is always chasing. My synopsis is that he was influenced by the modernist rule, but always found ways to bring it home. So the subdued red as a feature alongside the feature flat roofs. You put a flat roof on a concrete house over a running stream in a damp forest and water is going to find its way in. The skylights dripped, mold, there was mold. And the owner kept so many buckets like all around during a storm that he nicknamed his own house the 7-bucket building. Nothing quite says like iconic American masterpiece like a bucket roller. Okay, I'm wrapping up real soon, I promise. Last fun fact is Fallingwater was a single piece of a much bigger fantasy Wright was spinning up for this family. He designed them a stone meditation chapel in the woods, never built, 2 gate lodges, one for his son and the other for support staff, also never built, and also a planetarium close to the department store in the area, also never built. And after that, the craftsman cheated on Wright, hiring his rival at the time, Richard Neutra, to build them a second masterpiece home in the desert. Well, this family really has a great collection of angry architects. So is Fallingwater the greatest house in America? In the world? A bad machine for living, a great work of art? Like, that's the verdict, and that's the whole trap. Because every famous house you see online is selling you the same trade, art over function. The job, your job, my job as the person planning your home is to take the art and refuse the trade. So that's really what this series is about. Every video, I'll take an iconic house, walk you through it floor by floor, and pull out exactly what's worth stealing and what's worth refusing. Next week, I'm going to get into the Farnsworth house. So imagine Fallingwater, everything we've learned, except instead of house grows from rock, the brief was house is fish tank. That's it. See you next week.